Hi, good morning, welcome. I'm Angus from LabVac, and today on the bench I've got a Vacuubrand RZ 2.5. This is an extremely popular pump here in the UK. To the best of my knowledge, it pretty much is everywhere else as well. These are bread and butter to me. I service a lot of these pumps. It's a very good little unit. So we're going to run through today dismantling, and then I will take it away and clean it, and then I will show you reassembly. This one is covered in stickers, some of which I'm trying to keep covered up. If you see any stickers with other people's names on, just shut your eyes if you would. So I'm going to start by tipping this up on end. I did cover a very similar pump from Vacuubrand in another video, so you might want to refer to that. I decided I would go ahead and do this one because the 2.5 is so common that it will be, directly applicable to a lot of people. So I'm going to start by taking this plate out from underneath the pump. Behind this you have the felt pads. I know that nobody watches more than one of these videos, but I often moan about the felt pads. Not moan so much, but moan. Yeah, I often moan about the felt pads. The only purpose of putting these felt pads in here is to soak up oil that's leaking from the pump. You can see that is absolutely full of oil. In my opinion, and it is only my opinion, I don't speak on behalf of any manufacturers or anybody else when I say, if your pump's leaking, get it serviced. So putting felt pads in there to sort of hide the fact that there's something wrong with your pump seems counterintuitive to me. But most of the manufacturers, not all, but most of them, put a felt pad in there in one way or another. So they obviously don't agree with me. But, if there's something wrong with my car, I'd like to know about it, not have something hiding it from me. Anyway, rant over. So, unlike all the other pumps that we look at on this channel, Vacuubrand pumps, you have to disassemble the motor. It's not flanged onto the pump. Most of them, you've got 4 bolts here. You undo the bolts, you lift the motor off as a complete piece. This pump and the other Vacuubrand pumps don't work that way. The motor is actually built up onto the pump. I've got no problem with that because I've got the tools. But one thing you will need, I've taken the fan cover off there, obviously. We don't need to take the fan off, it can stay there. But we do need to now undo these 3 motor rods that run through and hold the motor on to the body of the pump, and you do need a special tool to do that. I'll hold that up, hopefully you can. I don't know whether you can see that. Maybe you can. It's slotted. If you look at the bolts, you'll see the type of tool that you need. I do get a lot in where people have tried to take these out with a pair of pliers or whatever. The bolts tend to be in tight, and with heat cycling, they're gripped in there pretty well. What tends to happen is that you go at them with a pair of pliers and you just end up wrecking the heads. And once you've done that, you've got a real problem trying to take them out. So if you're going to try this yourself, get the right tool. You contact me, contact the manufacturer of Vacuubrand, will supply you with the tool if you need it. So having taken those 3 out, which is very easy when you've got the right tools, the motor then will lift off. Okay, but this is actually dismantled now, this motor. So if the bearing that holds this end of the motor shaft is actually the pump mechanism itself. So you can't run this. If you try and run this motor off the pump, that's going to rattle about something terrible and damage it, so don't. Okay, you can only run these motors when they're attached to the pump. So, sharp knock on the end of the shaft will release it. That's where the coupling is, it's where the shaft seal sits, so that needs to be in good condition. This one has got some residue, the lines that you can see there. There's some very slight wear, but I don't see a problem with that. That will go back in. And then the armature, is that the right word? Will move out of the way. So underneath there we've got a plastic cap. The purpose of that is if the pump's leaking oil, it will stop the oil from going through into the motor. To be honest, the motor doesn't care. Motors don't mind if they get some oil in them, so it's a kind of a little vanity thing there more than anything. But we're now down to the shaft seal. So we've got 3 machine screws holding that in, which need to come out. And then this shaft seal carrier here has an O-ring behind it. And generally, when the pump has been in use, again, heat cycling and so on, it's very difficult to remove that. So I'm going to leave that in place, although I've taken the screws out. That's not going to fall out from there, so I'm going to leave that in place. When we get inside the pump, I can knock it out from the other side. It's going to cause less damage. So to take the handle and the inlet, we need to take the rubber top from the gas ballast. Just move that out of the way because that will stop this plate from coming off. And then with a 5mm Allen key, we can undo those 2 screws holding that on there. Move those out of the way, and then that plate will come off there, and that's what also holds the handle on. And then the gas ballast will lift out again. It's O-ring sealed underneath. That comes off there. The inlet port will come off there. You should have this strainer inside, which you can pop out from underneath. So you want to make sure that that's clean. This one is. You want to make sure there's no debris in there blocking it up. And then again, we've got the O-rings from under here, which are well and truly stuck down, but they all need to be peeled off. I'll keep them in a big heap. When it comes to checking the kit, if you're unfamiliar with the equipment you're working on, it's very useful to have the old parts that you're going to replace. You can compare them to the new parts, make sure that you've got everything that you need. It's also very helpful, the kits that you buy for most vacuum pumps will cover multiple models, or they will cover changes that have been made over the lifetime of the pump. So you're going to have some parts in there that you don't need for the pump you're working on. And that can cause obviously a great deal of confusion when you're trying to put it back together. If you've kept all the parts you took out, then you can say, right, okay, this part that's in the kit did not come out of my pump, therefore I don't need it. So it's a very useful way to keep track of what you're trying to do, because there's nothing worse than getting to the end of a job and having half a dozen unidentified parts, and you think, well, is that supposed to be in there? Is it going to explode if I run it without that part in there? Or if you didn't take one out, then you don't need to put one in. So I'm now taking out the 4 bolts, screws that hold the oil box on. They come from the rear, if you like. A lot of pumps, they come from the other side. But we've got 4 of those. They've each got a split washer you can assemble without the split washers. It isn't going to make a massive amount of difference. But again, since they're there on this pump, I want to keep them with the screws, even just from the point of view that I don't want to find that I've got loose washers on the bench and then wonder where they're supposed to be. So to take the oil box off, this one's come apart very easily. Usually they're quite stuck on. Again, you've got an O-ring under there, heat cycling, etc. What I would do if it doesn't want to come off, keep it on the bench and just tap round the corners of the oil box. Use something like this. This is a rubber coated mallet. Anything soft. You don't want to be hitting that with a metal hammer, because this is aluminium and this is going to give up long before your metal hammer does. But some, rubber or leather or something like that, and just give it a tap, that will release it, and then the whole pump lifts out of the oil box like that. This one is not the worst. It's got some debris in there, but it's not the worst I've ever seen. The pump itself looks like that. One of the things I don't like about this pump is that you can't remove the what normally would be a base plate here that you can unscrew and get out of the way. You can't with this. So when I turn it back over and put it down, it's at a funny angle, and I don't want that. I'm using this bench here which has a lip all the way around it to stop oil from running over the edge, so I can't even hang it over the edge, but there we go. So that's our big seal that seals the oil box. That is actually a formed seal. On the larger models they use an O-ring that you form on the pump. This actually comes in the kit as a rectangle. The piece that fell out there is the coupling cross. In between the motor shaft and the pump shaft, you have this little plastic piece, sits in there. A lot of pumps you'll have a rubber spider between the two in a coupling. Vacuubrand uses these. These are great in the event that your pump seizes up. That being the plastic weak link will break and protect your motor from being destroyed. So you often find when you're servicing that those are broken and you've got to replace them. They're not in the kit. It's a separate part, but if you need it, then replace it. And there are several of them throughout the pump. So we're going to go in now and just break this down. Two ways of going about it. These two bolts that I'm pointing to run right the way through and hold the whole of the cartridge onto the adapter plate. So we could take those out and dismantle, remove that and then take it apart in stages. Or we can do what I'm going to do. Just from experience, I know that some of these parts are easier to take off first, because while I've got a nice big bit of metal to hold on to, I can get some of these finer screws out. So I've got 3 screws. Take those out to open up the oil pump. So the oil pump cover comes off there. You need to check that's in good condition. You often see wear there that can cause problems. So get those out of the way. I'm not going to go in. It's tempting to try and pick these things out, get in there with a pick. You're going to damage things. They'll come apart easily when you get to the right point. So up until then, we'll leave them alone. The oil control mechanism is in here, so I want to take that off. It just unscrews. So just release that by the flats. And you can see what we've got here is again a valve. So there's a spring there and a piston, and the oil pressure will cause that to open up and let oil circulate through. When the pump turns off and there's no oil pressure being generated, the spring will close that down, isolate that, and stop oil from moving around where you don't want it to. So that part comes off there, and then just try and get a better angle there. This is our exhaust valve from the pump. underneath here. So there's our rubber pad with a spring, and then it sits inside here. This kind of half fills up with oil and works as a separator. These can get quite clogged up and need quite a bit of cleaning, but they're very robust and they tend to come back well again. You know, everything's available as a separate part if you need it, but for the most part, I'm guessing that you won't. Only one of those on here. On the larger pump, the RZ6, you would have two, one for each stage, but in this pump both the stages are the same size, so you can't build up pressure between the two, so you don't need to release that pressure with a separate valve. So I can now take out the through bolts. Underneath the through bolts there are Doughty seals. Again, generally these don't come out very easily. I would leave them where they are, because when the parts go in the washer, there we go. So that's what's underneath. It's a Doughty seal. If you haven't seen Doughty seals, it's a metal outer ring with a rubber bonded to it in the centre. So the rubber is actually sealing, but the metal maintains the shape of the seal. They're excellent seals, Doughty seals. They should be used for absolutely everything. But yeah, as I say, generally they'll fall out easily once the parts have been washed, but they're difficult to pick out, so leave them, let them come out when they're good and ready. And then with those two long bolts removed, the whole pump will come out like that. It will usually leave behind, as it has done here, the end plate. Okay, that's not part of the machining, that has to come out of there because there are seals that we need to change behind it. Again, it's usually well stuck in. Okay, can be difficult to remove. Likewise, we've still got our shaft seal carrier on the outside. So at this stage, we need to just gently get in there and tap things to release them. Figure out which one's going to give first, basically. Both need to come out. What I'm going to do, I have got here a screwdriver which has got all the sharp bits removed, so it shouldn't do any damage. Just place it down in there and find the back of the shaft seal, and then with a tap, that's how we knock it out. So my screwdriver was going down there onto the back of the seal, so the only thing that's going to get damaged is the seal itself, which we're going to be replacing. Okay, so that's got that out there. That's the O-ring. I'm not going to remove every O-ring on this pump on camera because it's going to take a while. They're so stuck in there, but that's what was holding it in place. So with that out, we can now see the back of the inner section that we need to remove. This is a very tight fit. It's not a true interference fit, but it's getting there. It's really in there. So what I tend to do, having got the shaft seal out of the way and got access to the back, is to use a shaft seal driver. This is very well used. This is my special Vacuubrand one that I don't use for anything else. Sit it on the back of there, give it a tap, and it'll just push that through, and then that can be taken out of there. So you see under there, there's a series of O-rings that have got to be renewed as part of the service, so that part has to come out. There's another one there on the back. All of those are going to come out and they're all going to be replaced. What you've also got behind there, that's very important, is the gas ballast star, which is a little star-shaped bit of rubber that sits there, and that's the non-return valve for the gas ballast. So when air flows into the gas ballast, it will push this out of the way and let air travel through. When oil tries to push back the other way, it will push against that rubber, sealing up the port, stopping any oil from coming out. So that's another part that absolutely has to be replaced. So that's everything out of the adapter. Back to the pump cartridge itself. It's in these sections. I think quite a few years ago I went into the training at Vacuubrand in Germany, and I seem to recall that they call it an umbrella design, where each section sits inside the next one. I'm not quite sure why it's called that, but I think that's what they called it. I might be remembering wrong. So there's our first stage rotor, vanes. You've got a single spring in each of those. That's the stator. Again, series of O-rings. All need to come out. Most of the stages have a similar arrangement of O-rings, so if I show you once, we should be there. So you've got the large skinny one that sits around the outside. Man, these are stuck in. Okay. You obviously don't want to scratch stuff up when you're doing that. I use that metal pick, or engineer's scribe, or whatever it's called. I don't tend to have problems, but I do this all day, every day. Little tiny O-ring there. And that's the final one. Good practice is, if you are able, if you've got a decent size O-ring, stick the pick into the O-ring. Again, like I showed you with the shaft seal, this part's going to be replaced anyway. So if I damage the O-ring or tear it in any way, it really doesn't matter. But if I stick the pick in onto the metal and scratch that, it could cause me problems trying to get a seal later on. So that comes off. Got our centre bearing there, which is an end plate to either stage and carries the, I call it a bearing, that there's no ball bearing or anything in there, but the fit that you've got between those two parts is bearing the load of the rotor. So that should be a tight fit, but obviously with enough give that the thing can rotate. So that's there, and then again we've got the same O-ring arrangement there. The larger O-ring that we took out from here doesn't carry on all the way through the pump, so they stop halfway. Then we've got our second rotor and vanes. You can see, as I described, the vanes from the two stages are identical, as indeed are the rotors. And then we've got another coupling, that same plastic type coupling, that sits between the two rotors and provides drive. If one of the stages gets contaminated and locks up, seizes up, that coupling is going to break. So it will take the lobes off there and break. And what that does is it breaks the drive from the pump from going through, the drive from the motor rather, from going through the pump. So it protects anything else that hasn't got damaged yet, basically. It's a nice little feature. Second stator, this one is machined out for the valve. And there is another coupling. Basically, there's a coupling between each stage. And right now we're back to our oil pump. And because we've got access from behind, I can just push my finger up there and it comes straight out. So there was no need to dig at that and try and remove those earlier. They pop out easily when you get to the right point in dismantling. There's a shaft seal underneath there, which is effectively inserted backwards to the way you normally insert a shaft seal. So that's a tricky one to get at. There's also an extremely fine O-ring that seals the oil pump cover plate. So that's a tiny O-ring. They often break up. So to remove that shaft seal, which I'm not going to do right now, but I'm going to tell you how. It's not part of the minor service kit, it is part of the major service kit. It tends to be good practice to replace them. There's one of the very small ones there, and there's one here at the other end of the pump. This acts as a sort of routine inner shaft seal, but they're only 3mm thickness as opposed to the normal 7mm shaft seals that you see elsewhere. So they're very fine. So if you go anywhere near it, you've got to replace it. If they're in great condition and you're going to leave them alone, if you're just sort of cleaning the pump, then don't be tempted to try and pop it out and put it back in. It's very unlikely that you'll manage to get it out in one piece because they're so fine. And this one is tricky to get at because it's deep in there. You can get something down, a small screwdriver would be better than this scribe, but to illustrate, you can get down behind it like that and knock it through forwards. The alternative is to use a split collet puller, which is this arrangement whereby you put this piece down through the seal, and then as you wind this in, it opens up the collet there to grip it from behind, and then once that's in place behind the seal, you attach a slide hammer, and then like that you can pull the seal out that way. That tends to work pretty well. It's not 100%. Sometimes the seal packs up and falls apart and doesn't leave you anything for the puller to pull on, so that does happen, but usually by that stage it's shifted it enough that you can then go back to knocking it through from behind. That's how you would do those. There's loads of information about split collet pullers and everything in my other videos, so have a dig around. By all means contact me if you want more info. I don't go through every single thing in every single video, otherwise I'd never get any work finished. So there we go, that is all of the parts of our Vacuubrand RZ 2.5 dismantled. This will all go off and get thoroughly cleaned, which will take another few hours, and then I come back and reassemble it. Okay, we're back. We're back with this Vacuubrand RZ 2.5, which we're going to rebuild, see if it works. So because of the unique, shall we say, design of the Vacuubrand pump, you've got to build the motor up first, and then we'll flip it over and build the rest of the pump. So the first thing that goes in here is the outer shaft seal. Now, when you buy the kit, it will come, the outer shaft seal, pre-installed in a new carrier. It comes just like that. There's an O-ring that sits around it, and then that drops into place. And then we've got to find our 3 little screws which hold that in place. If you're struggling, mix them all together. They're the 3, they're raised and countersunk heads. So they're quite distinctive, and you should have 3 of them to do that. There's nothing else quite like it. It's fairly straightforward to identify. So that's the outer shaft seal in place. And then we have the plastic cover. In the major kit there is a replacement for the O-ring on here. This O-ring hasn't seen any serious duty. It's not getting hot, there's no moving part involved, so I'm putting the old one straight back in there, no problem at all. Now you could fit your felt pads, which sit underneath here, You could do that at this stage. I tend to leave those out. I do fairly extensive testing on the pumps, and if I'm going to find that I've got any kind of a shaft seal leak, I would rather know that before I fill up the felt pad. So I put them in after I'm right at the very end, just before the pump is ready to go out. So that's why I haven't put those in now. So the next thing to go on is the motor windings, which will drop into place there. Good way to line them up is just to follow the paint marks, because in the factory when they paint the pumps, they're painted after. Again, it's the last stage in the process. So when you take them apart, you'll see all the areas that didn't get painted. And then the shaft of the motor goes through next. Now, this section here is going to go through the outer shaft seal. I've cleaned this down. This is in very good condition. This particular sleeve section is replaceable if yours is in terrible condition. If it's deeply grooved from the old shaft seals, then it can be replaced. It's not part of any kit. It's a separate part, and it is a tricky-ish job to do. It's not the easiest process, but this one's in great condition, so I don't need to worry about it. I've put some oil on there all the way through the assembly. I'm going to be putting a lot of vacuum oil on there. I just want to make sure that that's lubricated, because as I say, as I drop this in, it is going to pass through the shaft seal, and I don't want to damage the shaft seal. So go gently, feel it go down, and it will find its way. And then just align the bolt holes. There they are. So those three motor tie rods will drop into place. And then we need that special tool to do them up. They will self-align to a certain extent. As you tighten them, they'll tend to pull the motor round as the cap comes down onto it. But you want to get it fairly much there. They're very thin rods, so they can be damaged. Just line things up as you go. And as with everything that's held by multiple fasteners, you just do a few turns on each, move on to the next one, keep working your way around and coming back to them to tighten them down, so you get even force on all of them. So that's the motor in, and then put the fan cover on, which will be the 3 painted screws. Normally these go on fine. I've had the odd one that just doesn't want to line up all 3 screws at the same time. But this pump has a metal fan cover, which I do find tend to be better. They don't warp with heat the way that the plastic ones do, which can make them very difficult to refit. Yep. Missed that one. There we go. Okay, that's that end of the pump done. So now I'm going to flip it over and we're going to start to build the pump up, and we'll basically build it up onto the shaft that's there. So one of the things that I think is a good idea, I said I'm going to put a lot of assembly lubrication into this. It's going to tend to drain down and come out of the inlet port. So I'm just going to put a bit of absorbent paper, rag, blue roll, whatever you've got, just in there. Otherwise the oil will tend to run out of it or run down. It just makes a mess. It's not a problem, you can clean it up again later, but there you go. So we're starting now to build up the layers of this umbrella thing. So the first thing I'm going to put in, because I do sometimes forget, is the gas ballast star sits in there. And then each of these grooves is going to receive an O-ring. I'm fairly au fait with these pumps. You can spot the O-rings from the pile on the bench, but you may need to spend a bit of time just working out which ones go where. And I've got a nice friendly kit here where all the O-rings are lying down, so I'm not having to do too much stretching and so on, which is good, because they are thin, you know, they do break. I'm going to use the same technique as we build up the pump. This is how I like to do it. What I do is take the part that's being installed, drop the through bolt in, line the through bolt up with the thread, a couple of turns, and then I know that as it goes in, I'll be in the right position. If you assemble everything and then try and put the bolt through at the end, you're going to find that things are misaligned. So there's one more O-ring that goes in here. You can see there's a groove there, which is for this one. But I tend to find it's easier to fit that onto the back of here, like that, and then assemble that in. So lube up inside and out, right the way across the surface, and drop the bolt through, and then snug that down. Now this part is generally the one that is tight to put on. What you want to end up with is that it's flat, so that the standoff all the way around is the same, so you know it's gone down true onto the adapter. And then we can take that out, and then we basically build up, filling the recesses with their O-rings as we go. See, that's what tends to happen with these. They tend to be a little bit small, so you'll put it in and it'll pop back out. So you need to just gently, very gently, stretch that out and put it back in, so that it sits, because if it pops out while you're placing the next stage, then you're going to trap it. That's going to throw everything off. You'll lose your seal, and it'll be terrible. Now we come to the first of our plastic coupling crosses. Dunk that in the oil, lower it in, and again you need to line it up with the slots. Any excess oil can just be smeared around the place like that, and then our first rotor will go in. So as I'm going, I'm double checking every part, because they sit on the bench for a little while and they can tend to pick up dust and grit and so on. We don't want. Again, we've got a shaft seal here, so I'm going gently into the shaft seal and then just turn that by feel, so that I know it's gone down onto the plastic cross coupling properly. And then what you can do is rotate as you go, obviously, just to make sure everything's free. But I'll put the bolt back in there because if I rotate this, there's a possibility the plate's going to move as well, which we don't want. First pair of vanes. So the vanes need to be clean. See, there's a bit of debris on there. I'm just using a little bit of Scotch-Brite just to make sure that hasn't got to be shiny new, but we don't want to introduce any debris as we go along. Now I need a spring. I'll assemble those two together into the oil. Oil everywhere now. And then slide them through. You could put them through the rotor first and then put the rotor into place. And then what you may find is that they stick if you do it this way as they go through. Just need to very gently lift the leading vane. They tend to dig down and stick into the slot in the rotor. But once it's through, make sure they're moving freely, which they are, and then we can fit the stator. And this is the one without the valve. So same method, drop that through, make sure it's lined up. You're going to need to reach underneath there to squeeze the vanes. So you get the top one in and then push up on the bottom one so that they fit in, obviously, against the spring tension. And on we go. More O-rings. More oil. Next section is going to be the centre bearing. Just sit on there. You'll notice we no longer have the O-ring here. So that's as far as that passage travels. Got another cross coupling to go in there for the next rotor. Next one will go in. I'm feeling for the alignment, making sure all the time that everything is still rotating freely. The second pair of vanes will slot through there. You hear the dog next door. It's not my dog. And again, just pushing that vane in. And the pile of little O-rings there is dwindling. That's good. Now, we are now up to the oil pump section of the pump. Now there's a little bit extra to do here. Going to need both of the long through bolts now. And you'll remember when we took it apart and said that there were these doughty seals. So this is where they go. We're closing it up now. So the Doughty seal goes on as a washer, and then that drops in, just eyeballing here to make sure that the old ones are out. No, I did it, but it's well worth checking. And then that can drop onto there, line up with the rotor, and then if everything is aligned as we went along, that should drop straight in like that. So we haven't had to dig through and rotate things and try and find the path for those bolts. So I need a 4mm Allen key, and I can bring those down. Very important not to push this one way or the other, so here more than ever I'm just doing a couple of turns each way, or rather a couple of turns on each side at a time. Not even that actually, probably less than a full rotation of each bolt until they feel snug. Obviously feeling that they, by my super hands of torque wrench, that they feel the same. I'm not going very tight on them at this point. I've got them snugged down. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take, we've got that slot in the end of the rotor where the last of the cross couplings is going to go. I've got a screwdriver that just so happens to fit. I'm going to put it into that slot, and I'm going to go very carefully because I do not want to damage that slot with my wrongly sized screwdriver. But it does just allow me now, with the whole pump closed up, to just give that a turn. And I'm listening for the sounds that it's making. I want to hear that lubrication that I put in there being circulated. So that's all good. I'm happy with that. Now I can go in and tighten that down a little bit more. If I get to a point where it doesn't rotate freely, not that I'm having to put effort in, this should be turning really freely. If I get to a point that it isn't, then I know that I've either tightened it up too much or I've got something in there that isn't happy. But that's enough. That's as tight as it needs to go. Everything's O-ring sealed, so yeah, I'm going to make a seal in there. And I'm happy. That's moving freely. So I can go ahead and put the oil pump into place. So the last of the cross couplings drops down into there. I haven't replaced the shaft seal in the oil pump. It's in good condition and it's not part of this basic service that I'm doing on this particular pump for this particular customer. I would change it if I felt that it wasn't going to perform, but it looks good to me. It's still soft to the touch, so it's staying. Oil pump rotor, again line it up. That's going through that shaft seal, so it's a shaft seal fit. So I'm doing that carefully, gently. Just snug it down like that, and then the oil pump vanes again can go into place. I'm using loads of lubrication all the way through. Don't want anything to be dry when I start this pump up. Any excess, obviously, the pump will just exhaust it. The pump's got oil handling capabilities, it regulates itself, so not a problem. And with that all in place, you can put the super fine O-ring in there, put the oil pump cover on. you do need anything pump-wise, do get in touch. I'm located in the UK, as you can probably guess. So if you're UK-based yourself, be pleased to hear from you. But likewise, anywhere else in the world, if you want to ask a question, feel free to comment on the video or get in touch by any other means. There's extra details in the description. So there we go. That's that part of the pump built up. Final things we've got to do is our valve. There is but the one. So the valve and spring assembles into there. Screw goes in. Whole lot goes into there. Okay. Eventually it fits. Tighten that into place. And then the oil regulating valve, which is this piston, spring that goes with it. Assemble those into the housing. What I try to do is just push that through and grab it by the back of the piston, just so the piston isn't in the way when you put it into the threads there. And then that just needs to be nipped up. I'm literally just nipping that into place. And that's the pump built. So we can now go ahead and fit the oil box, or fit the pump into the oil box. Another thing that bugs me a little bit with these pumps is the sight glass here is bonded in. You can't take it out to clean it, so it is tricky to do. You've got to get inside. I use Scotch-Brite and get in under that flange to try and clean it as much as possible. But I always look at them afterwards and think, oh, I wish I could have taken that out, given it a proper wash. But there we go. I need the seal for the oil box, which wasn't on the bench. So there we go. That's a pre-formed rectangular seal. Sits onto there. Can't go wrong with that. I'm just taking off any excess oil. Not that it does any harm, just that it, when I tighten this up, it's going to ooze out, and I'd like to keep it clean if I can. And then, because of the way that this is bolted down, the bolts come through from the back. So you could fit this and try and put the bolts up from underneath. But the way I do it is to turn the whole pump over and drop it into the oil box. And then you wriggle it around until it sits down on the seal, which it just did. And at this point I can take an oily rag out. It didn't do 100% of a job. You see, you end up with oil running down the back. If you can see a better way to do things, do let me know, because every day's a school day. There's a couple of these long screws that go into the top, and then the much shorter ones go in at the bottom, and you'll remember they all have their split washers, and they can all get tightened down. Get very close to finishing this pump off. So the final thing to do at this stage is our oil box needs to be dressed, and our inlet and gas ballast ports need to go on. So I'll start with the gas ballast, which is that O-ring there. That's going to fall off when I turn this on. Nearly always does, but not today. The gas ballast control is this hole in the rubber cover, which lines up with this hole here. When you look at it, the arrow on the top points gas ballast going in, gas ballast not going in. So you just want to line that up, and the hole there will sit about there. Doesn't make any difference whatsoever to the operation of the gas ballast. It just means that the arrow points the nice way, the way it did when you first got it. And then the inlet goes in there, and the handle goes in at this point as well. So the handle will sit here, and it goes underneath this plate. So the plate drops over all of those. And we've got those to go in there, which is a 5mm Allen key. Wind those on, don't go mad, don't go super tight. Basically, as soon as the handle is gripped, you're there. So that's all in place. And then the cover can go on the gas ballast. And all that remains is a drain plug and a fill plug. So the drain plug goes in there with its new O-ring. And I need a 6mm Allen key for that. And the fill plug goes in the top. And then this pump came in with an oil mist eliminator, which fits on this side here, which is why I've got nothing in that port. So I will take this now over to the test bench, put it on test for a while, get a final figure, and I'll just tag something on the end that shows you how it got on. If you found it useful, tell someone about it. Thanks a lot. So just to finish off, there's our Vacuubrand RZ 2.5 down at 110 to the -3. Good clean pump in the end. There's still a little bit of foaming in the oil there, which is normal with the Vacuubrand pumps. They have an aerator inside which causes that foaming. What it does is it gets all of the air that's entrapped in the oil out. And after 10 minutes or so, that foaming will stop. So if you see that on your pump, don't panic, it's perfectly normal, and it will go away after a little while. So there we go, we're all done.